Alright, so this evening we are going to take some video notes over and review organelles. And so our essential question is, can you describe the structure, function, and analogy for different organelles in our cells? And so when you think of the word organelle, it has the word organ in it. So when you think of the word organelle, I want you to think of little organs, little bits of specialized organs functioning together to make the cell work. And so the first organelle I want to review is a vacuole. So vacuoles are a storage compartment. They store materials like water, salts, proteins, other carbohydrates, food within the cell. And so if you look at the difference between a plant vacuole versus an animal vacuole, there are differences because plants store different amounts of water versus an animal cell. The mitochondria is another organelle I want to review with you, where what happens is it converts chemical energy from food into usable energy for the cell. And so all eukaryotes, like plants and animals, have mitochondria. They actually have a couple of mitochondria in just one cell itself. Chloroplasts are these green structures found in producers like plants that take energy from the sun and converts it into a chemical energy to be able for it to be used for plant cells. The nucleus is found in all eukaryotes, and that's what makes a eukaryote a eukaryote, is that there is a nucleus inside of the cell. And the nucleus's main job or function is to keep the DNA safe. So it contains all of the genetic material that the cell has. Now, we've talked about in the biochemistry unit last trimester that proteins are very, very important to living things. And so there are a few organelles that are important in the process of how a protein is made and then how that protein can get out to the rest of the body. So we're going to trace a pathway of how the protein is made to how it gets out. So the first step is that proteins are all made in the organelle called the ribosome. So the main function of ribosomes is to make and synthesize proteins. Once the protein is made, that protein is going to travel to the ER, or the endoplasmic reticulum. Once it goes to the endoplasmic reticulum, those proteins then are taken to the Golgi apparatus. And the Golgi apparatus is then going to do some more parts to the protein. So here's a picture over here showing you a ribosome. The ribosome makes the protein, and then the protein travels through the ER, the endoplasmic reticulum, and then a vesicle shoots it off, and it's going to go now to the Golgi apparatus. So when you get to the Golgi apparatus, what happens is the protein is modified. It's checked and checking for to make sure it works properly, it's made properly, and it's all good to go. So then the Golgi apparatus is going to package the protein, package it into what we call a vesicle. So it's going to put bubble wrap around it, put it in a box, and make sure it's all safe so that once it's in that package, the protein can leave the cell and go do what it needs to do. And it leaves the cell through a process called exocytosis. Exo is a root word you need to know. Exo means out. Cyte means cell. So it's going to go outside of the cell. And so here is another picture of that protein going from the ER to the Golgi apparatus. Here's what the Golgi apparatus looks like. And like I said, it's packaging it into a vesicle box to make it and protect it so it can go out of the cell and go where it needs to go. So I want you to remember the order of this pathway of a protein. The first step is the ribosome, where the protein is made. The second step is the endoplasmic reticulum as a traveling company, and then the Golgi apparatus is the packaging to ship it out safely. Okay, another organelle that we know to review is called lysosomes. Lysosomes is basically a removal system where it removes all the junk inside of the cell. So it contains these enzymes. And remember, back in biochemistry, enzymes help speed up chemical reactions. So lysosomes help speed up and break down a bunch of different stuff in the cell. So sometimes it breaks up macromolecules, sometimes it gets rid of old organelles that aren't working anymore, sometimes it gets rid of invaders like viruses and things that aren't supposed to be in the cell. And so lysosomes are mostly found in animal cells. It's pretty rare for it to be in a plant cell, so it's mostly in animal cells when we're referring to lysosomes. And then the cell wall is another organelle we're reviewing, and the cell wall is a very tough, rigid, but a little bit flexible surround barrier on some cells, like plants, fungi, and bacteria. And so if you look in the picture here, the cell wall is going to be on the very outside of the cell, right up next to the cell membrane, but on the very outside. And it's made of a sugar called cellulose. It's a polysaccharide. It's a macromolecule. And so the cell wall helps protect the cell, and it's very rigid to keep its shape. The cell membrane is the last organelle to review, and the cell membrane is very, very important to cells because it helps regulate or tell what things can come in and what can leave the cell. And we call the cell membrane selectively permeable. It's choosy, it's selective about what can come into it and what can leave. The cell membrane also is able to help with keeping the cell's shape and help also support of the cell. So when you break down and look at the cross-section of the cell membrane, we call it a lipid bilayer. Remember when we talked about lipids in biochemistry that a lipid can help make up the cell membrane. So we're looking at a flexible but strong barrier between the outside of the cell and the inside of the cell. And so when you look up closely and you zoom into the lipid, there is your glycerol and your fatty acids. So the glycerol is the basically the head part of the lipid, and this is what we call hydrophilic. It loves water, so it's going to be surrounded on the outside of the cell and inside the cell where the fluid of the environment of the cell membrane is. And then the fatty acids are these two tails right here, and the fatty acids are what we call hydrophobic. They're phobic. They're scared of it. They don't want to be by water. And so that's why those two tails on either side are both together, facing away from the fluid. Now also inside the cell membrane are the different kinds of channels, and those channels consist of proteins. And so there's also proteins embedded into the cell membrane to help get larger things in and out of the cell. So what I want you to do with these notes is to write 2 questions and a summary of some of the information that you reviewed from your organelles.